I hadn't yet managed to pass along Poirot's cryptic message to Lawrence. But as I wandered onto the lawn that afternoon, still quietly nursing my irritation at Poirot's high-handed secrecy, I spotted Lawrence on the croquet ground. He was tapping a pair of battered old balls with a mallet that looked as though it belonged in a museum, moving without purpose, as detached as ever. It seemed the perfect chance. If I didn't deliver the message now, Poirot might step in and handle it himself. I'll admit, I had no clear grasp of what the message meant, but I fancied that Lawrence's reaction, perhaps with a little well-placed probing on my part, might reveal its importance, so I approached him. "I've been trying to find you," I said, an outright fabrication. "Have you?" he replied mildly. "Yes, the fact is, I've got something for you from Poirot." He looked up. "From Poirot?" "He specifically told me to wait until we were alone," I added, lowering my voice and watching him carefully. I've always prided myself on my ability to create what people call an atmosphere. "Well," he prompted. His dark, brooding expression didn't flicker. Did he have any idea what was coming? "This is what he said." I leaned closer, speaking almost in a whisper. "Find the extra coffee cup and you'll be able to rest easy." Lawrence stared at me, genuinely bewildered. "What on earth is that supposed to mean?" "You don't know," I pressed. "Not in the slightest, do you?" Reluctantly, I shook my head. "An extra coffee cup," he repeated. "He'd do better asking Dorcas or one of the maids. That's their department, not mine. I know nothing about coffee cups, except that we've got some that are never used and are absolutely exquisite. Old Worcester. You're not a collector, are you, Hastings?" "No," I admitted. "Pity, you miss a great deal. A flawless piece of old china, it's a pleasure just to hold it." "Well then, what shall I tell Poirot?" "Tell him I haven't the faintest idea what he's talking about. It's pure nonsense to me." "Very well." I turned back toward the house, but he suddenly called after me. "Wait, what was the message again? Say it once more." "Find the extra coffee cup and you can rest in peace," I repeated carefully. "Are you sure it means nothing to you?" He shook his head slowly. "No," he said thoughtfully. "I don't understand it, but I wish I did." Just then, the deep boom of the luncheon gong rolled across the lawn, and we went in together. Poirot had been invited to stay for the meal and was already seated when we arrived. By unspoken agreement, the grim events of the past days were avoided. Conversation drifted to the war and other distant matters. But once the cheese and biscuits were served and Dorcas had withdrawn, Poirot leaned forward toward Mrs. Cavendish. "Forgive me, madame, for touching on painful ground," he said gently, "but one of my little notions, those little notions of his were becoming infamous, requires clarification." "From me?" Mary Cavendish asked. "Of course." "You are most kind. The door connecting Mademoiselle Cynthia's room with that of Mrs. Inglethorpe, you stated it was bolted." "Yes," Mary replied, surprised. "I said so at the inquest." "Bolted?" Poirot repeated. "Yes." "Allow me to explain," he said quickly. "Are you certain it was bolted and not merely locked?" "Oh, I see. No, I can't say for certain. I meant only that it was secured and wouldn't open. I believe all the doors were found bolted from the inside." "So, from your own observation, it could have been locked rather than bolted?" "Yes, that's possible." "When you entered the room, did you actually see the bolt?" Mary hesitated. "No, I didn't look." "I did," Lawrence cut in abruptly. "I noticed it myself, it was bolted." Poirot's shoulders sagged slightly. "Ah, then that settles it." I confess I felt a flicker of satisfaction. For once, one of Poirot's ingenious ideas had led nowhere. After luncheon, Poirot asked me to walk back with him. I agreed, though not warmly. "You are displeased with me, are you not?" he asked anxiously as we crossed the park. "Not at all," I replied, with a chilliness that contradicted my words. "That's good," Poirot said softly. "That eases my mind more than you can imagine." It wasn't quite the reaction I'd hoped for. I had expected him to notice the coolness in my tone, to feel the edge of my irritation. Still, the warmth and sincerity in his voice went some way toward softening me, and my resentment began to thaw despite myself. "I gave Lawrence your message," I told him. "And his reaction?" Poirot asked quickly. "Total bewilderment, yes." "Completely. I'm convinced he had no notion what you were driving at." I had braced myself for disappointment, perhaps even annoyance, but instead Poirot merely nodded as though everything had unfolded exactly as planned. He said he was pleased, very pleased indeed. My pride kept me from probing further. Without warning, he shifted the subject. Mademoiselle Cynthia was absent from luncheon today. Why was that? She's back at the hospital, returned to work this morning. Ah, he said approvingly. A diligent young woman, and charming too. She reminds me of the Italian Madonnas in old paintings. I should like to see her little dispensary one day. Do you think she would allow that? I'm sure she would. She's proud of it and it's quite interesting. Does she go there daily? Every day except Wednesdays, and she comes home for lunch on Saturdays. Those are her only breaks. I shall remember that, Poirot murmured. Women are doing remarkable work now. Mademoiselle Cynthia is intelligent, yes, very intelligent. She passed a difficult examination, I believe. Undoubtedly, it's a position of great responsibility. They must keep powerful poisons there, no? Yes, she showed them to us once. They're locked in a cupboard and they're very strict about it. The key is always removed when the room is empty. Indeed, Poirot's eyes flickered. And this cupboard near the window? No, on the far side of the room. Why do you ask? He shrugged lightly. Curiosity, nothing more. Shall we go in? No, I said. I think I'll head back the long way through the woods. The woods surrounding Styles were exquisite. After crossing the open park, it was a pleasure to wander beneath the canopy of leaves, where the air was cool and green and still. There was scarcely a breath of wind. Even the birds seemed to chirp in hushed tones. I walked for a while, then dropped down at the base of a massive old beech tree. My thoughts were unusually charitable. I forgave mankind in general, and Poirot in particular, for his maddening secrecy. For a moment I felt perfectly at peace. I yawned. The murder itself felt distant now, unreal, as though it belonged to another life. I yawned again. Perhaps I thought drowsily it had never happened at all. Perhaps it was only a nightmare. After all, it was Lawrence who had murdered Alfred Inglethorpe with a croquet mallet. Clearly that was the truth. And John's outrage over it all, his shouting and fussing, was really quite unnecessary. I tell you I won't have it. I jolted awake. At once I realized my situation was decidedly awkward. Barely 12 feet away, John and Mary Cavendish stood facing one another, and they were in the middle of a heated argument. Worse still, they had no idea I was there. Before I could retreat or make my presence known, John repeated the very words that had dragged me from my sleep. I won't have it, Mary. Her reply came cool and smooth as polished glass. And what gives you the right to judge my behavior? It'll be all over the village, John snapped. My mother was buried on Saturday and already you're parading about with that man. She shrugged lightly. If gossip is all you care about. It's not, I'm sick of him hanging around. Besides, he's a Polish Jew. A trace of Jewish blood, she said calmly, might do something to sharpen the rather dull intellect of the average Englishman. There was fire in her eyes, ice in her voice. John's face flushed scarlet. Mary. Well, her tone didn't soften. The appeal drained from his voice. So you intend to keep seeing Bauerstein, despite my wishes? If I choose. You defy me. No, I simply deny your authority to control me. Or do you imagine you have no friends I might object to? John staggered back as though struck. The color slowly left his face. What are you implying? He asked hoarsely. You understand perfectly, Mary replied quietly. You see now that you have no right to dictate my friendships. He looked at her with desperation etched into his features. No right, he whispered. None at all, he reached out. Mary. For a heartbeat, she seemed to waver. Something softer crossed her face. Then, abruptly, she turned away. None. She started to leave. John lunged forward and caught her arm. Mary, he said very quietly now, are you in love with Bauerstein? She hesitated. Then her face took on an expression as old as time, mysterious, knowing, almost cruel. She freed herself gently and spoke without turning. Perhaps. And with that, she disappeared from the glade, leaving John rooted to the spot. I stepped forward deliberately, snapping a few twigs beneath my feet. John turned, assuming, luckily, that I had only just arrived. Oh, Hastings, he said, You saw the little fellow back to his cottage, quaint chap, clever though. He was regarded as one of the finest detectives of his era. Well, I suppose that counts for something, John muttered. Still, what a wretched world it is. You feel that way? I asked. Absolutely. First, this horrible business. Scotland Yard men popping in and out like toys in a box. Headlines screaming our shame across every newspaper. There was a crowd at the lodge gates this morning, gawking as though it were a free exhibition. Sickening, isn't it? Take heart, I said gently. It won't last forever. Won't it? He said bleakly. It only needs to last long enough to ruin us completely. No, you're letting it get too dark, I protested. Dark, John shot back bitterly. Anyone would turn morbid when they're hunted by vile reporters and gawked at by crowds of empty-faced fools everywhere they step. And that's not even the worst of it. What's worse than that? I asked. He leaned closer, dropping his voice as though the trees themselves might be listening. Have you ever really thought about it, Hastings? It haunts me. Who actually did it? Sometimes I tell myself it must have been an accident, because who could have done such a thing? With Inglethorpe gone, there's no outsider left. No one, that is, except one of us. The words hit like a blow. One of us, the thought was enough to chill any man to the bone. If not an outsider, then surely it had to be someone within these walls, unless... A sudden idea flared in my mind. I seized it, turning it over rapidly. Piece after piece clicked into place. Poirot's strange maneuvers, his cryptic hints, they all made sense now. How blind I had been not to see it sooner, and what a blessed relief it would be for everyone. No, John, I said firmly. It's not one of us, that's impossible. Then who? He demanded. There's no one else. I hesitated, then asked quietly, can't you see it? He shook his head, no. I glanced around instinctively, then lowered my voice. Dr. Bauerstein, I whispered. His eyes widened. That's absurd. Not at all. But why would he want my mother dead? What possible motive? That part I can't explain, I admitted. But this much I know, Poirot believes it. Poirot? John stared at me. You're sure? I told him about Poirot's sudden, electric excitement when he learned that Bauerstein had been at Styles on the night of the murder. He said it twice. That changes everything. And think about this. Inglethorpe claimed he set the coffee down in the hall. At that very moment, Bauerstein arrived. What if, as Inglethorpe showed him through, the doctor slipped something into the cup? John considered it grimly. Risky, very risky. Yes, but possible. And how would he know it was her coffee? No, Hastings, that theory's shaky. But another piece had surfaced in my mind. You're right, it wasn't done that way. Listen. And I told him about the cocoa sample Poirot had quietly sent for analysis. John cut in immediately, just as I had earlier. But Bauerstein already had it tested himself. Exactly, I exclaimed. That's the point I missed before. If Bauerstein were guilty, what could be simpler? He swaps the poisoned cocoa for an ordinary one before sending it in. Naturally, no strychnine is found. Case closed. No one would suspect a man of his standing or think to test another sample. No one except Poirot, I added, finally seeing the brilliance of it. But the bitterness, John objected. Cocoa wouldn't hide that. We only have his word for that. And remember, he's one of the greatest toxicologists alive. One of the greatest what? Say that again. He knows poisons like other men know wine, I explained. Who's to say he hasn't discovered a way to neutralize the taste? Or perhaps it wasn't strychnine at all, maybe some obscure substance that mimics its effects. John nodded slowly. That could be, but there's still a problem. How did he get access to the cocoa? It wasn't downstairs. No, I admitted reluctantly. And then, like a flash of lightning, a horrifying thought struck me. I prayed John wouldn't reach it too. I glanced sideways. He was frowning, deep in thought, and I let out a slow breath. The idea was almost unbearable, that Bauerstein might not have acted alone. Surely not. Surely no woman as beautiful as Mary Cavendish could be a murderer. And yet, beautiful women had poisoned before. My mind raced back to that first afternoon tea, to the strange light in her eyes when she'd said poison was a woman's weapon, to her agitation on that fatal Tuesday evening. Had Mrs. Inglethorpe discovered something between Mary and Bauerstein? Had she threatened to expose it, to tell John? Was murder the price of silence? Then Poirot's cryptic exchange with Evelyn Howard came flooding back. Was this the dreadful possibility Evelyn had tried so hard to deny? It all fit terribly perfectly. No wonder Miss Howard had spoken of hushing it up. Now I understood her unfinished words. Emily herself! Would Mrs. Inglethorpe have chosen justice, or would she have preferred her death remain unavenged rather than stain the Cavendish name forever? There's something else, John said suddenly. I jumped, guilt flooding me at the sound of his voice. What is it? I asked quickly, grateful he'd moved away from the Coco question. Bauerstein demanded a post-mortem, he said. He didn't have to. Wilkins would have been satisfied with heart failure. Yes, I said slowly. But maybe he thought further ahead. Someone might talk later. The Home Office could order an exhumation. Then everything would come out, and no one would believe a toxicologist of his caliber could honestly mistake poisoning for heart disease. That's possible, John conceded. Still, I can't see his motive. I felt a tremor run through me. I may be wrong, I said hastily. Entirely wrong, and remember, this stays between us. Of course, he said. As we talked, we had reached the small garden gate. Voices drifted toward us. Tea was laid out beneath the sycamore, just as it had been on the day I arrived. Cynthia had returned from the hospital. I took a chair beside her and mentioned Poirot's wish to visit the dispensary. Oh, I'd love that, she said brightly. He must come to tea there one day. He's such a dear little man, though very odd. The other day he made me take my brooch out and put it back again because it wasn't straight. I laughed. That's one of his fixations. Yes, isn't it? We sat quietly for a moment. Then Cynthia glanced toward Mary Cavendish, leaned closer and lowered her voice. Mr. Hastings. Yes. After tea, I need to speak with you. That quick glance Cynthia cast toward Mary stayed with me long after. It set my thoughts turning. There was little warmth between those two. If anything, a quiet tension lingered whenever they shared the same space. For the first time, I found myself wondering what the future held for Cynthia. Mrs. Inglethorpe, for all her authority, had made no arrangements for the girl at all. Still, I imagined John and Mary would insist that she remain with them, at least until the war's end. John, I knew, was genuinely fond of her. He would hate to see her sent away. John himself reappeared from the house just then. His usually open, cheerful face was drawn tight with irritation. Blast these detectives, he burst out. I can't imagine what they think they're doing. They've been through every room, rummaging, poking, turning the place upside down. It's intolerable. I suppose they chose the moment when we were all out. I'll give that fellow Jap a piece of my mind when I see him. Bunch of meddling busybodies, muttered Miss Howard. Lawrence offered, rather drily, that the police had to look busy somehow. Mary Cavendish, as usual, said nothing at all. When tea was over, I suggested to Cynthia that we take a walk. She agreed at once, and we drifted into the woods together, the house and its troubles fading behind us. Well, I prompted, once the trees closed around us and we were safely hidden from curious eyes. With a weary sigh, Cynthia dropped onto a mossy bank and pulled off her hat. Sunlight filtered down through the leaves, catching in her auburn hair until it shimmered like living gold. Mr. Hastings, she said softly, you're always so kind, and you seem to understand things. It struck me then, quite forcefully, that Cynthia was really very lovely. Far warmer, far more open than Mary, who never spoke so freely. Well, I repeated gently as she hesitated. I need advice, she said at last. What should I do? Do what? You see, Aunt Emily always told me I'd be looked after. I suppose she never thought, well, that she'd die. But there's nothing, no provision at all, and now I don't know where I stand. Do you think I ought to leave here at once? Leave, certainly not, I exclaimed. They wouldn't want that. She hesitated, tugging at the grass with nervous fingers. Then she said quietly, Mrs. Cavendish does, she hates me. Hates you, I cried. Cynthia nodded. I don't know why, but she can't bear the sight of me, and he can't either. That's not true, I said firmly. John is very fond of you. Oh yes, John, she agreed. I meant Lawrence, not that I care whether Lawrence dislikes me or not. Still, it's dreadful, isn't it, when you feel no one really wants you? But they do, I insisted. You're mistaken, John cares and Miss Howard. She nodded, though without conviction. Yes, John likes me, I think, and Evie, she's rough, but she'd never be cruel. But Lawrence avoids me whenever he can, and Mary can barely manage politeness. She wants Evie to stay, she's begging her to, but not me, and I don't know what to do." Her voice broke, and suddenly she was crying in earnest. What came over me then, I can hardly say. Perhaps it was the way the sunlight haloed her hair, or the relief of being with someone so clearly untouched by the darker currents swirling around us. Perhaps it was simple pity. Whatever the reason, I leaned forward, took her hand awkwardly, and blurted out, "Marry me, Cynthia." The effect was instantaneous. She stopped crying at once, sat upright, withdrew her hand, and stared at me with sharp disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous," she said briskly. I felt myself bristle. "I'm quite serious. I'm asking you to do me the honor of becoming my wife." To my utter astonishment, she burst out laughing. "You funny dear," she cried. "It's very sweet of you, but you know perfectly well you don't mean it." "I do," I protested. "I've got—" "Never mind what you've got," she interrupted. "You don't truly want to, and neither do I." "Well," I said stiffly, wounded, "that settles it. Still, I don't see what's amusing about a proposal." "No," she agreed, smiling. "But someone might say yes one day. Goodbye, you've cheered me up wonderfully." And with one last ripple of laughter, she disappeared among the trees. Left alone, I reflected that the entire encounter had been deeply unsatisfactory. Suddenly, another thought struck me. I would go into the village and look up Bauerstein. Someone ought to be keeping watch on the man, and it wouldn't hurt to lull any suspicions he might have that he himself was under scrutiny. Poirot had once spoken highly of my tact, and I resolved to put it to use. I made my way to the small house with the apartments card in the window, where Bauerstein was staying, and knocked. An elderly woman opened the door and peered at me. "Good afternoon," I said pleasantly. "Is Dr. Bauerstein in?" She stared at me oddly. "Haven't you heard?" "Heard what?" "About him." "What about him?" "He's took." To my intense irritation, Poirot was nowhere to be found. The elderly Belgian who answered my knock blinked at me placidly and informed me that, to the best of his belief, Poirot had gone up to London. London? I stood there momentarily speechless. What conceivable reason could Poirot have for rushing off to London at a moment like this? Had the idea struck him suddenly, or had he already planned it when we parted only hours earlier? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I turned back toward Styles, my steps heavy with annoyance. With Poirot absent, I felt utterly at sea. Had he anticipated Bauerstein's arrest? Worse still, had he somehow engineered it? My mind chased itself in circles, finding no answers. Meanwhile, a far more immediate problem loomed. Should I announce the arrest at Styles or keep silent? Though I refused to admit it outright, one name weighed heavily on my thoughts: Mary Cavendish. How devastating such news would be for her. For the moment, I dismissed every shadow of suspicion against her. If she were in any way involved, surely some hint would have surfaced by now. Of course, Bauerstein's arrest could not be hidden forever. By morning, every newspaper would carry it. Still, I shrank from being the one to break the news. If only Poirot were available, I would have gladly deferred to his judgment. What possessed him to vanish to London at such a critical juncture? And yet, against my will, my respect for his brilliance grew. Left to myself, I would never have suspected the doctor at all. The notion had been planted entirely by Poirot. Yes, however exasperating he might be, the little man was undeniably formidable. After some thought, I resolved to confide in John and let him decide whether to speak openly or not. When I told him, he let out a long, astonished whistle. Good heavens, then you were right after all. I couldn't bring myself to believe it. It's shocking at first, I admitted, but once you look at it closely, everything seems to fall into place. What do you think we should do? By tomorrow, it'll be common knowledge. John considered this carefully. We'll say nothing for now, he decided at last. No point stirring things up. As you say, it'll come out soon enough. Imagine my surprise then when I came down early the next morning, snatched up the newspapers and found not a single word about Bauerstein's arrest. There were columns of speculation about the Styles poisoning, endless filler and recycled facts, but nothing new, nothing concrete. The silence was unsettling. I assumed Jap had his reasons for keeping it out of print, but it troubled me nonetheless. It suggested something unfinished, something still unfolding. After breakfast, I resolved to go into the village and see whether Poirot had returned. But before I could leave, a familiar face appeared at the window and a cheerful voice rang out. Bonjour, mon ami. Poirot, I cried, rushing forward. Relief flooded me. I seized him by both hands and pulled him inside. I can't tell you how glad I am to see you. I've told no one except John. Was that the right thing to do? My friend, said Poirot mildly, I have no idea what you are talking about. Bauerstein's arrest, of course, I snapped. Is Bauerstein arrested then? You didn't know? Not in the slightest. He paused, then added calmly, Still, it hardly astonishes me. We are, after all, very near the coast. The coast, I echoed. What on earth has that to do with it? Poirot spread his hands. Surely it is obvious. Not to me. I fail to see what the sea has to do with Mrs. Inglethorpe's murder. Nothing whatsoever, he said pleasantly, but we were discussing Dr. Bauerstein's arrest. Well, he's been arrested for murdering Mrs. Inglethorpe. What? Poirot exclaimed, eyes bright with mock amazement. Dr. Bauerstein arrested for that? Absurd, a magnificent comedy. Who put such an idea into your head? Well, no one exactly, I admitted, but he has been arrested. Oh, undoubtedly, said Poirot, but for espionage, mon ami. Espionage, I gasped. Precisely. Not for poisoning Mrs. Inglethorpe. Not unless Jap has gone completely mad, Poirot replied serenely. But you led me to think. He gave me a look of gentle pity that conveyed volumes. You mean to tell me, I said slowly, recalibrating my entire theory, that Bauerstein is a spy? Poirot nodded. You never suspected. Never. A renowned London physician burying himself in a quiet village, roaming about at all hours of the night, fully dressed. That seemed perfectly normal to you. I never questioned it. He is German by birth, Poirot went on thoughtfully. Naturalized years ago, brilliant mind, a Jew, of course. The scoundrel, I burst out. On the contrary, Poirot corrected gently. A patriot, consider the risks he runs, I admire him. I could not share his detachment. And Mary Cavendish has been seen everywhere with this man, I cried. Yes, Poirot agreed. Very convenient. While tongues wagged about them, no one noticed his other activities. Then you don't believe he ever truly cared for her? I asked, far too eagerly. That I cannot say, Poirot replied, but I will give you my private opinion. Yes, Mrs. Cavendish neither cares for him now, nor ever has. I could not hide my delight. You really think so? I am certain, and do you know why? Why? Because she cares for someone else. Oh, a warmth spread through me before I could stop it. Certain moments, certain looks rose unbidden to my mind. The door opened abruptly. Miss Howard entered, glanced quickly around the room, and produced a folded sheet of brown paper. On top of the wardrobe, she murmured, handing it to Poirot before leaving just as swiftly. Poirot unfolded it with keen interest and gave a satisfied exclamation. Come here, Hastings, tell me, what letter is that, J or L? The paper was dusty, clearly old. At the top was the printed stamp of Parkson S., the theatrical costumers. It was addressed to Cavendish, Esquire, Styles Court, the initial frustratingly ambiguous. It could be T or L, I said after studying it, but it certainly isn't J. Excellent, Poirot said, folding it carefully. I agree entirely, it is an L. Where did it come from? I asked. Does it matter? Moderately, he replied. It confirms a suspicion. I deduced its existence and asked Miss Howard to find it. She has not disappointed me. And on top of the wardrobe. Poirot smiled faintly, exactly where she found it. A strange hiding place for a scrap of brown paper, I murmured, still staring at it. Poirot barely glanced up. Strange? Not in the slightest. The top of a wardrobe is precisely where such things belong: paper, boxes, odds and ends. Tidy, invisible, harmless. I myself have stored many such items there, always arranged with care. Order, Hastings, always order. I hesitated, then leaned closer to him. Poirot, I said quietly, have you finally decided what truly happened? Have you solved it? He straightened, his eyes sharpening. Yes, or rather, I am convinced I know the manner in which the crime was carried out. A chill ran through me. You do. Regrettably, he continued, my certainty rests on logic alone. I lack the solid proof unless. Suddenly, he seized my arm with surprising strength and dragged me out into the corridor. His voice echoed down the hall as he called out rapidly in French, his excitement spilling over. "Mademoiselle Dorcas! Mademoiselle Dorcas! A moment, if you please." Dorcas emerged from the pantry in a flutter, wiping her hands on her apron, startled by the urgency in his tone. "My dear Dorcas," Poirot said, almost vibrating with anticipation. "I have had a thought, a small thought, but if it proves correct, it will be magnificent. Tell me on Monday. Not Tuesday, mind you, but Monday, the day before the tragedy. Was there any trouble with Mrs. Inglethorpe's bell?" Dorcas blinked, astonished. "Why, yes, sir. Now that you mention it, there was. I wondered how you knew. The wire had been gnawed through, probably a mouse or something of the sort. The repairman came and fixed it on Tuesday morning." Poirot released a long, ecstatic breath, as though the world itself had just aligned perfectly. Without another word, he marched back toward the morning room, practically glowing. "You see, Hastings," he said triumphantly, "one should trust reason alone. Proof is unnecessary, yet how comforting it is when facts bow obediently to logic. I am renewed, I am reborn, I could run, I could fly." And he did run, and leap, and cavort like a man possessed, racing across the lawn outside the open window, arms flailing, legs pumping, utterly unself-conscious in his joy. "What on earth is your extraordinary little friend doing now?" came a voice behind me. I turned to find Mary Cavendish standing close at my side. She was smiling, and I found myself smiling too, though I hardly knew why. "I wish I could explain," I said. He questioned Dorcas about a bell, and her answer sent him into fits of delight, hence, whatever that is. Mary laughed softly. "He's disappearing through the gate. Is he coming back today?" "I've stopped trying to predict Poirot's movements. It's safer that way." She tilted her head, amused. "Is he quite mad, Mr. Hastings?" I considered that. Honestly, sometimes I'm convinced he's completely unhinged. And then, at the precise moment he seems most ridiculous, I realize there's a razor-sharp mind at work beneath it all. "I see," she said thoughtfully. Though she smiled, there was a gravity about her that morning. Her expression lingered somewhere between worry and weariness, as though her thoughts were far away. It struck me that this might be the right moment to speak to her about Cynthia. I chose my words carefully, gently, or so I thought, but I hadn't gone far before she stopped me with a raised hand. "You needn't plead on her behalf, Mr. Hastings," she said calmly. "I assure you, Cynthia has nothing to fear from me. Your eloquence, however admirable, is quite unnecessary." I began to protest, flustered, but she interrupted me again, and what she said next swept Cynthia entirely from my mind. "Mr. Hastings," she asked quietly, "do you think my husband and I are happy together?" The question caught me completely off guard. I stammered something about it not being my place to judge such things. "Perhaps not," she replied, "but whether it is or not, you should know this, we are not happy." I remained silent, sensing there was more to come. She began to pace the room slowly, her head slightly bowed, her graceful figure moving with a restless rhythm. Then she stopped abruptly and looked straight at me. "You know nothing about me, do you?" she asked. "Not where I came from, not who I was before I married John, nothing at all. Well, listen, I'm going to tell you, you seem kind, I trust you." For reasons I couldn't quite explain, I didn't feel flattered. Cynthia's earlier confidences came back to me uncomfortably. And besides, the role of confessor hardly suited a young man like myself. "My father was English," she said, "but my mother was Russian." I said slowly, "that explains it." "Explains what?" "That sense of something different about you, something foreign. I've always felt it." She nodded. "My mother was said to be very beautiful. I wouldn't know, I never saw her. She died when I was very young. There was some tragedy surrounding her death. An accidental overdose of a sleeping draught, I believe. My father was devastated. Soon after, he entered the consular service. Wherever he was posted, I went with him. By the time I was 23, I had seen nearly the entire world." Her face softened, her eyes brightening with memory. "It was a wonderful life. I loved it." Then her expression darkened. "And then my father died. He left me with very little. I was sent to live with elderly aunts in Yorkshire." She shuddered. "For someone raised as I was, it was unbearable, narrow, suffocating. The monotony nearly broke me." She paused, then added quietly, "And then I met John Cavendish." "Yes," I prompted. "To my aunts, he was an excellent match. And perhaps he was, but that wasn't why I married him. He was escape, nothing more." She waited, then continued. I was honest with him, completely honest. I told him I liked him, that I hoped affection might grow, but that I wasn't in love. He said that was enough for him, so we married. She fell silent again, her brow creased as she searched her memories. He cared for me at first, she said at last. I'm certain of it, but we were poorly suited. We drifted apart almost immediately, and though it wounds my pride to admit it, he grew tired of me. I must have made a sound of protest because she cut me off quickly. Oh, he did, but it hardly matters now. We've reached the end. The end, I repeated. What do you mean? Her voice was steady. I mean I will not stay at Styles. You and John are leaving. John may remain, she said, but I will not. I stared at her. You're leaving him. Yes, she said finally. But why? I pressed, sensing the weight behind her pause. She hesitated, as if choosing her words with care, then whispered almost defiantly. Perhaps because I want to be free. At that instant, a vivid image flashed before my mind's eye, wide-open spaces, untouched forests, the scent of wild air, the thrill of lands unclaimed. In that moment, I understood Mary Cavendish in a way I never had. She was a creature of freedom, untamed, proud, a spirit too wild to be confined. My heart raced as I imagined her wings clipped by the suffocating walls of Styles. A sudden, fragile cry escaped her lips. You don't understand. You can't imagine how this wretched place has felt like a prison to me. I understand, I said gently, though my voice trembled slightly. But please don't act rashly. Rash, she echoed, the word rolling from her tongue with a touch of mockery, almost amusement. And then, before I could stop myself, I blurted out words I would have given anything to take back. You know, Dr. Bauerstein has been arrested. For a fraction of a second, a frozen mask of indifference crossed her face. Emotion vanished, leaving only cold calculation behind. John was kind enough to tell me this morning, she said, her voice flat, almost chilling. And what do you think of it? I asked, my own voice sounding uncertain even to me. Think of what? The arrest, I insisted. What is there to think? She replied, tilting her head as if weighing invisible facts. Apparently he is a German spy. That's what the gardener told John. Her face remained unmoving, her expression unreadable. Did she care at all, or had she already detached herself completely from Bauerstein? She stepped aside, touching one of the flower vases absent-mindedly. These are dead, I must refresh them. Would you mind moving, please? Thank you, Mr. Hastings. And with a crisp nod, she walked past me toward the window, dismissing me with the faintest air of indifference. No, surely she could not care for Bauerstein. No woman could perform such an icy act of detachment. The following morning, Poirot did not appear, nor did the familiar figures from Scotland Yard. Silence reigned over Styles, an uneasy, waiting silence. At lunchtime, a new twist emerged, though it was a disappointment. The fourth letter Mrs. Inglethorpe had written the night before her death could not be traced. Weeks of searching had yielded nothing, and we had begun to give up hope. And then, almost theatrically, the post brought a reply from a French music publisher, acknowledging Mrs. Inglethorpe's check, but regretting they could not locate the set of Russian folk songs she had requested. The trail ended abruptly. The last potential clue from that fateful evening vanished into thin air. Just before tea, I decided to seek out Poirot, hoping he might shed light on the new dead end. But as usual, he was out. Gone to London again? I asked the old Belgian man with an edge of frustration. Oh no, monsieur, he has taken the train to Tadminster, to inspect a young lady's dispensary, he said. Foolish man, I muttered under my breath. Wednesday is the one day she isn't there. Well, tell him we'll look him up tomorrow morning, will you? Certainly, monsieur. But the next day came and went. Poirot did not appear. My patience was fraying. His cavalier disregard for punctuality was beginning to feel personal. After lunch, Lawrence pulled me aside. His expression was unusually tense, his hands restless. Are you going down to see him? He asked. No, he can come to us if he wants, I said. Oh, his voice dropped, conspiratorial, almost a whisper. But if you do go, would you tell him? I think I've found the extra coffee cup. A spark of curiosity ignited within me. I had almost forgotten Poirot's cryptic message, but now intrigue and anticipation pulled me back toward Leastway's cottage. This time I was welcomed with a smile. Poirot sat at the table, hands buried in his hair. At my entrance, he sprang up, eyes bright. "What is it, mon ami? You are not ill?" I asked, trying to mask my concern. No, but a matter of great importance confronts me," he said solemnly. "Whether to catch the criminal, I hope," I said lightly, though my heartbeat quickened. He nodded gravely. "To speak or not to speak, as your Shakespeare puts it, yes, that is the question." "You're joking, Poirot." "Not at all. Never has a matter been more serious. The balance is delicate, my friend. It is a woman's happiness at stake." I was momentarily struck dumb. Poirot straightened, tapping his chest with pride. "The moment has arrived, and even Hercule Poirot hesitates, but I am the one and the only one who dares attempt it." After a ceremonious pause, I relayed Lawrence's message. "Aha!" Poirot cried, clapping his hands. "He has discovered the extra coffee cup. Long-faced Monsieur Lawrence is more perceptive than he appears." I refrained from contradicting him. Instead, I gently reminded Poirot of my instructions regarding Cynthia's days off. "Ah, yes, my memory is like a sieve," he admitted, shaking his head. "But the young lady was kind. She showed me everything with the utmost patience and courtesy." "Well, then he must go to tea with Cynthia another day," I said, smiling. I informed him of the letter, the final dead end. "Alas," he sighed, "I had hoped for that, but it is not to be. This mystery must unravel from within," he said, tapping his temple. "These little gray cells, as you say, mon ami, they must work." Then abruptly he asked, "Tell me, are you skilled in identifying finger marks?" "No," I admitted, slightly puzzled. "I know each is unique, but that is all." "Precisely," he said. Unlocking a small drawer, he retrieved several photographs and spread them on the table. "I have numbered them, 1, 2, 3. Examine them and describe what you see." I leaned over, studying the images. All highly magnified. Number 1, clearly a man's prints. Thumb and first finger. Number 2, much smaller, a woman's prints. Number 3, chaotic at first glance, but the man's prints are visible, overlapping the rest. "Beyond doubt." "Yes, identical." Poirot nodded, carefully locking the photographs away. "As usual, you will not explain further?" I asked. "On the contrary, number 1, Monsieur Lawrence. Number 2, Mademoiselle Cynthia. Comparison only. Number 3 is more intricate." "Yes," I leaned forward. "It is a magnified study of a tiny bottle, from the top poison cupboard of the dispensary at the Red Cross Hospital in Tadminster. A Bayenne. Sounds like the house that Jack built non." "Good heavens," I exclaimed. "But Lawrence never went near the poison cupboard when we were there." "Ah, but he did," Poirot said calmly. "Impossible, we were all together." Poirot shook his head. "No, my friend, there was a moment, a fleeting moment. You could not all have been together, or it would not have been necessary to summon Monsieur Lawrence to the balcony." I remembered faintly, only for a moment. "Long enough," he said with a knowing smile. "Long enough for what?" I asked, curious despite myself. Poirot's lips curved into a smile, enigmatic, teasing, almost mischievous. "Long enough for a gentleman once trained in medicine to satisfy a very natural curiosity," he said, his voice light, almost musical. Our eyes met, and I caught that flicker of inscrutability that always made him so maddeningly unreadable. He rose, humming a soft, whimsical tune, and I watched him, suspicion prickling along my spine. "Poirot," I said cautiously, "what exactly was in that little bottle?" He didn't turn, he merely glanced over his shoulder, his tone casual. "Hydrochloride of strychnine," he said, almost as if commenting on the weather while continuing to hum. "Good heavens," I breathed, not in surprise. I had expected that answer, but in the cold, grim weight it carried. "They rarely use the pure hydrochloride," he continued, pacing slightly. "Mostly it's the standard solution strychnine hydrochlor, that finds its way into medicines. That is why the finger marks remained untouched until now." I leaned closer, astonished. "And how did you manage to photograph it?" He gave a little shrug, almost dismissively. "I dropped my hat from the balcony," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Visitors were forbidden below at that hour, so despite my apologies, Mademoiselle Cynthia's colleague had to fetch it for me." "You knew what you'd find, didn't you?" I asked, leaning forward, my curiosity piquing. "Not at all," he said, smiling faintly. I only realized it was possible, given your story, for Monsieur Lawrence to access the poison cupboard. Possibility must be confirmed or denied. That is all. Poirot, I said, your cheerfulness doesn't fool me. This is significant. This is a breakthrough. Perhaps, he said softly, yet one thing strikes me, as I am sure it has struck you. What is that? There is altogether too much strychnine in this case, he said, his brow furrowing in quiet irritation. Third time we encounter it, Mrs. Inglethorpe's tonic, the strychnine sold at Mace S in the village, and now this, handled within the household itself. Confusion, and as you know, I abhor confusion. Before I could reply, the door creaked, and a Belgian servant poked his head in. There is a lady below asking for Mr. Hastings, he announced. A lady, I said, jumping to my feet. Poirot followed me silently down the narrow stairs. Mary Cavendish was waiting, framed by the doorway, a brisk energy in her step. I've been visiting an old woman in the village, she explained, and as Lawrence told me you were with Monsieur Poirot, I thought I would call for you. Alas, madame, Poirot said, his tone mock grave, I feared you had come to grace me with your presence. I shall one day if you ask me, she said, smiling slightly. That is good, and remember, madame, if you ever need a father confessor, Poirot's tone dropped playfully, Papa Poirot is always at your service. Mary regarded him with a sharp, appraising gaze, as if trying to decode some hidden meaning in his words, then turned away abruptly. Will you walk back with us to Styles, Monsieur Poirot? She asked, her voice brisk. Enchanted, madame, he said without hesitation. The walk back was brisk and tense. Mary spoke rapidly, almost nervously, as though aware of Poirot's ever-watchful eyes. The wind had sharpened, cold and biting, carrying the mournful sigh of the trees as though the estate itself were grieving. Mary shivered, tightening her black sports coat. As we approached the great door of Styles, a sudden, immediate sense of wrongness gripped me. Dorcas came running, her face streaked with tears, hands wringing helplessly. Behind her, the other servants huddled, eyes wide, ears straining. Oh, ma'am, I don't know how to tell you. Dorcas, what is it? I demanded, my pulse racing. Tell us at once. She faltered, voice trembling. It's those detectives. They've arrested him. They've arrested Mr. Cavendish. Lawrence, I gasped. Dorcas shook her head frantically. No, sir, not Lawrence, Mr. John. And then behind me, Mary Cavendish stumbled forward with a strangled cry, collapsing against me. I turned instinctively to catch her and froze, my eyes meeting Poirot's. There was no sympathy in his expression, only that quiet, unflappable, triumphant gleam, the gleam of a man who had anticipated this moment from the start.